So last week we talked about applying the principles to movement. Okay, the CHOP principles, as I call it: the clarity, the harmony, the order, and the purity. And to clarity, depending on purpose. Okay, you need to know what the purpose of what you're doing is, in order, and the intention in order to do something correctly. Okay, the harmony is to work out all the bugs. Okay, and the order is to get the details exactly right, and the purity is to get the flow correct. Okay, so by applying these, you constantly go deeper and deeper. And I discussed about establishing a pattern harmonic for each particular exercise. That each exercise, because of the sinews and all the sort of stuff in your body, they're essentially strings, and they're humming away. Okay, and that we want to get that signature, we want to get that cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And what we were talking about yesterday in class was the necessity of this for senior citizens, okay? Because as that ratio of connective tissue to muscle cells increases, sorry, okay, you end up with more connective tissue than you have muscle cells. Okay, or organ cells. And therefore, since connective tissue is glue, you have more likelihood of gluing systems together so that you cannot reproduce new cells. And the fact that you can't reproduce new cells means you're constantly in this state of gluing things together and apoptosing cells. Now, that's why you need to move. You need to move to make sure you don't get these adhesions. And secondly, you need to move to melt down a lot of that tissue. Okay, and we can set it up. As one person had a messed up arm the other day, I guess it was Christy, and I started to work on her arm because she had low carpal tunnel syndrome. And when we were done, just in a couple minutes, her arm was longer. And she said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, I melted all your adhesions in your arms that allowed your muscles to return to their normal things." And, "Well, how did you do that?" I said, "With a simple harmonic." Okay, you place a harmonic in there and the proteins of the adhesions just dissolve. Okay, they dissolve both by touch and also by sending a waveform into the deeper parts. And the proteins just go, "Oh, okay," and their chains just break. And then they liquefy. Now, the problem is if you don't continue to do this process, they can reform. Okay, so it's kind of like water. You know, you melt the ice and you get the water, but if it's still cold, it's going to freeze again. So it is with some of these adhesion proteins. Okay, so just melting the proteins isn't enough. You need to circulate them out of the system. And that's why you have to have the movement. Now, by movement, on the cellular level, you need less movement. Okay, because remember, these cells are really separated from each other in their world. And some of these cells are as separated as far apart as we all are in Cincinnati right now. Okay, and wherever Jennifer is.
Florida.
Oh, you're in Florida. Oh, my goodness.
That was my guess.
Good guess.
My realtor went down to Florida and she got COVID, and she called her doctor, and the doctor said, "It's the best place to be. if you're gonna have COVID, have it down there. Just, you have the salt air, you have the sunshine. It's just perfect. Builds up your vitamin D, helps you fight it all off."
Exactly.
So anyway, so we want to liquefy that, and like I said, so since we're all far apart, the cells are far apart. The motion is different. Okay, you can get away with creating motion through harmonic sounds, through your breathing. okay, through simple patterns that don't require destruction. So for cellular health, it's not crazy to believe that just breath or prayer can create significant motion to reestablish health. Okay? For the whole system of the body, you do need to move, because otherwise you're creating an environment that prevents these waveforms from moving. Okay? So if we're gluing ourselves together because we've been sitting down, okay, there's no space for these waveforms to go. So basically they hit the sound hits a wad of mud and it doesn't affect the cells that are around there. And this is particularly true in organ systems. Okay, they're surrounded by a lot of stuff. So if you're having a lot of organ system adhesions or intracellular adhesions, you need to establish physical motion to break those up. Okay, so that these waveforms can go in. But most of you are pretty active at this point. Okay, you're doing something. So that allows you to, like I was telling Mike, just lay down and breathe. Concentrate on your breathing, concentrating on your chanting. Now, fundamentally, I like to say prayer as well, but remember, you all know your, from meditation number 4, okay, we all have learned the okay, and all of you, I believe, has the chromatic healing, where you go through it in the different keys. All right, so you can be doing that, and you should be doing that. Okay, for Sheila's case, it blocks pain receptors. Okay, it opens up through the bones tissue pathways. It melts out the adhesions. What is neuropathy? Neuropathy is a process of nerves being frozen by a glue joint. And then you move the body and that nerve goes, Okay? So we find that people who have surgery, they say, oh man, it hurts so much because you have adhesions. And Sheila, when she got that shot, she had all that pain because the shot created this massive storm of adhesions. And you couldn't move that arm anyway without pain happening. We all remember what she suffered through.
For a whole year.
For a whole year. Okay? A frozen shoulder is like when Connie got her frozen shoulder, a lot of times it's an allergic reaction to a stimulus. And in the case of the shots, a lot of the vaccines, you get a localized allergic reaction and your body literally creates the adhesion so it doesn't move. And it literally blocks it. It's no different than sucking snake venom out. How does your body prevent a toxin from spreading? It cuts off all the means for it to spread. Okay? That's why your sinuses just go woof. I just keep that shit all up here, all right? Don't let that get into your body. And then we're going to kill it systematically. But sometimes it can't kill it. So your body just responds by freezing you up. So that's a natural response. It's an autoimmune response. It's untoward because, you didn't need it. You're really not dying, but don't tell that to the cells around there. Okay, so how do you get rid of that? Well, you have to use sound and manipulation. Okay, I've been in this game for 30 years of working on people. And you don't break down those adhesions with anything, they go to physical therapy. That's what you're going to get prescribed, physical therapy, and they'll brutalize you. Here, let's beat that out of there. Or they could just melt them out. So when Connie froze up her shoulder, especially the second one, okay, which is common because she had an autoimmune response in one and worked it all out, and then 6 months later had it in the other one. And I just said, Connie, I could get rid of all that for you. And after a couple of weeks of going to physical therapy, she said, okay, go ahead. And suddenly she had range of motion. Okay. There are many ways to do this. You can go through the process, or you can create or use the science that your body already knows and has been sociologically conditioned out of you. So that's why the prayer stuff and doing your chanting can work. All right. It's there. Now, any questions on that so far?
The PT can make things much worse because it enhances the bracing and further isolates the wounded area.
There you go.
For me.
Well, that's the way it is. It uses the destructive method of conditioning to break down the adhesions. Okay, so it's doing it through destruction. Let's do this so much that we burn all that stuff out, and then your new cells. And then when we get to seniors who have, at 60, you have half the amount of growth hormone that you did at 30, okay, and half the amount of cells, you're likely to get injured from the PT. If you're in your 70s, there's even a greater chance. But they don't adjust it. Your Pilates instructor is smart enough to adjust it, your degree of difficulty, but your physicians and your PT people aren't. Here's the protocols. These are the approved protocols. We must do the protocols or we will get sued. It's like going to a medical acupuncturist. Go to a Chinese guy, they use 2 needles. Go to a medical acupuncturist, they use 22. Why? Because that's the protocol. Okay, remember when Derek first started out? You're getting needled all over the place. Then finally he realized, I could just get away with a couple of needles here and that'll do the job.
Yeah.
Okay? But the first couple times you went in there, it was like being in a pincushion.
Inside osteopathic manipulation therapy. I don't know what they're doing there exactly, but do you know anything about that or how that relates to this?
Yeah, osteopathic is a more natural tissue flow. So they're basically doing a lot of what I was talking about, melting adhesions through gentle manipulations and elongations to reestablish proper length. Okay?
Okay.
So osteopathy, to understand the history of osteopathy, was a physical way of manipulating people for health. Basically, it goes back to the Greeks. Okay? And Tui Na is a Chinese version of that. So there were many physicians would just manipulate the body to reestablish energetic flow and tissue flow. Okay. Then what a brilliant osteopath came up with was called chiropractic. Okay. Brilliant in the sense that you can see more patients with less time. And basically, if we just work on the spine and just manipulate that, we can reestablish the natural flows through the whole body by using the nervous system. Okay, and this person was brilliant because he can make it work. But you can see more patients, get more money. Okay, I hate to say it, but that's the bottom line. And after working on a person for an hour and a half, you do 2 or 3 people, you're wasted. Okay, so there is a point to not doing that flow thing because you can't do a lot of patients per day, and there are a lot of sick people there, so you could treat more people. That's the same thing with Qigong and acupuncture. Acupuncture is the shortcut of Qigong. Okay, and it's also the thing that you can use on people who can't do their own exercises. So Qigong hands-on healing would be the preferred way to go because you can interact directly cell to cell, tissue to tissue. But if you've got 20 people that need help, it's easier to put needles into them and let the needles do the work while you're working on other people. Okay, so if you're going to do a public health sort of a system and have a clinic, you do need to have things. So we've gotten to the point where all we do is pills. Okay, you can treat a whole lot more people when you have a sick society. Okay, and herbs are another way of doing that. But anyway, so osteopathy is a very good form, but you also need very skilled practitioners. There are many people who could do craniosacral work, okay, can do the protocols of craniosacral, but not transform people. And craniosacral, I would say, is the greatest evolution of osteopathy. Okay, because it's taking that same nervous system thing and adding the tissues to it, and some of the later books on it as a tissue science are just kind of phenomenal. Okay, these dynamics of it. Yeah. It just set everything going in a much better direction. But everybody needs what they need, and everybody goes to what they want to go to. So if you have an osteopath who has talent, they can get a lot of things done for you. I'm a big fan of it.
There was an osteopath I saw years and years ago up in Dayton. I thought she was pretty good. She's probably retired by now. She was a little bit older than me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I hurt my back at work, and nothing major, but it had me, it wouldn't let go. And I thought she was pretty good. Can't remember her name now.
It's okay. It's like you said, she's probably dead.
She's dead, but I'm sure she's retired by now.
Oh yeah, I was thinking she's. I was thinking. Yeah, it's like so many of my old acquaintances are dead now. It's like, interesting. It's like that does.
Migraines. I mean, every 3 to 4 days, and nothing was working. Nothing. Sleeping, diet, nothing. And then I tried that, and it was changed within a week. Forever.
Did that happen after your children?
Yes, thank you. How did you know? That was exactly when it started. After my second delivery, yeah.
Yeah, it's because it's not uncommon. In women, because of the amount of stress that happens on their spinal cords, and that happens in their brain and hormonal systems. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you do really have to bring that stuff all back into an adjustment, and you got to do it through a manipulation process because there's no shortcut to it. Yeah, I wish there were more out there for women who have migraines postpartum. Mm-hmm. Some of them are related, to the pituitary. Some of them, especially women who have a lot of bleeding problems. Their pituitary and thyroids get messed up in childbirth, and they never recover. And some people have literally thyroid storms because of that. You know, remember I discussed how the spinal cord pumps the brainstem, which then pumps the hormones. Okay, so if you mess that up in your back, you put adhesions into the process of just carrying a child, and that whole pelvic action is messed up. You don't get that pumping, and your hormone system just drops out. Plus, you have all these extra hormones from the pregnancy. So it's a disaster waiting to happen. And there's a couple people, one of the, Michelle, what's her last name? Pierce, I think it is. She just developed a whole chiropractic, not chiropractic, a whole craniosacral thing working with postpartum women. And working with children. And she just kind of worked through Children's Hospital and just said, hey, you know, people need a big reset. So, yeah, it would be nice. That's women's health.
Yes, exactly.
Not some of these other things. That's working with women's health. Is let's look at the processes women go through and intercept these problems rather than just giving them pills and saying, and pap smears.
How does that myofascial stuff that Teresa and Sherry do at their Pilates, how does that fit into this discussion?
Each one of, it fits in fine. Okay, because there's many different names for the same principles.
Okay.
And there's many different myths that we call systems for each one of these principles. Okay, so, you know what, it's kind of like dry needling. Well, dry needling that physical therapists do is acupuncture. Okay, plain and simple. But it's also trigger point therapy. Okay, where they would normally use injections into, where they would do lidocaine injections into trigger points that would calm that aggravation down and inflammation down. Okay, so you take acupuncture and trigger point therapy, and then you get a physical therapist, and they are doing that. Now, they're using the same principles, but they have not been taught those principles. They've just been taught a technique that works on the same principles. Okay, trigger point therapy is acupuncture. It's as Talona used to say, ouchie treatment. Okay, and I said, what's ouchie treatment? You know, because I thought it was a Chinese name, ouchie. And he says, well, you go to the point that hurts and you put a needle there and you twist it and you go, ouch. And he called it the ouchie treatment. Okay, and so different cultures give you different reasons. Acupressure is the jock way of doing ouchie. And I'll push hard enough on it till you don't feel any more pain. But they're going to break down the adhesions and they're going to physically beat the trigger point on you. And anybody who's ever had a trigger point injection with lidocaine, that sends you through the roof. It's like, are you crazy? You know, that's something Dr. Mengele created. So, and the dry needling. So there are very principles and myths that the principles are there, and there's a lot of myths as to different ways of doing it. So kind of what they're doing is a same thing. It's a little bit of Tui Na, it's a little bit of osteopathy, but ultimately it's the same stuff. And if you're a gifted practitioner, you can do it, you get success, and people aren't screaming. If you're not, you're beating the hell out of them. That's why Connie liked her physical therapist so much, is he was a real gifted healer. Everybody else is screaming when they're doing it. And little Jason come in there and work with you, and he'd do this stretching that was very gentle, looked very osteopathic, and he wasn't doing it like all the other physical therapists there were doing it, because he could feel, he could sense. So that's why they hired him for the soccer team, for the whatever they are. I don't even know their names. Rick would know their name.
FC Cincinnati?
FC Cincinnati, thank you. So he became the physical therapist for FC Cincinnati. Well, all these $1 million bodies, you know. That's a pretty big thing. All right, so getting back to harmonics. So we can, well, actually, we've been on the subject. So I want to show you some simple things to bring it. I'm gonna see if we can do some share screen stuff here and bring up. This way. I've never done this before.
There we go. Here you go.
Hang on. I've never tried to do a YouTube video live. Okay, so what you're going to see here is a guy is going to show you how harmonics work on a string.
Bit by bit, this is maybe 6, 7 hertz, up to 8, 9 hertz. And suddenly you'll see when we hit 11 hertz, which I've already found out to be a magic number, what will happen is that the string will suddenly behave differently. This is 10 hertz, and this is 11 hertz right here. So you can see now, we'll freeze this. The string is in what's called its first mode of vibration. This is the frequency, 11 hertz, for this particular string and this particular setup. This is the frequency it wants to resonate at, the lowest one. This 11 hertz, so 11 times per second. What you can see is that even though we haven't changed the amplitude, the amount that the driver, the woofer, is moving up and down, the amount that the string is moving up and down in the middle has changed dramatically. And that's because it wants to ring at this frequency. Let's start the video again and see what happens if we increase the frequency again. So this is 11 hertz. Let's move it up. This is going up to something like 15 or 16 hertz, right? Let's see, right here. So we've changed now, we're moving faster, still at the same amplitude on the woofer. Now let's go to 22 hertz and see what happens. At 22 hertz, and remember our first mode of vibration was 11 hertz. At 22 hertz, you can see what we have here is the second mode of vibration. So this is the next frequency up that the string wants to vibrate at. 22 hertz is 2 times 11 hertz, so it's twice the frequency of the first mode of vibration. You can see again, I've frozen the video here so you can see what's going on. What's happening now is that the string naturally stops vibrating in the middle, but we still have 2 large excursions, 2 points where it's moving much more than the woofer is, on either side of that point where it's stopped. But this happens naturally. I haven't done anything to the string to make this happen other than to put in the frequency where this mode wants to vibrate. So let's start the string moving again. I'll start the video moving again, and we can see what happens if we keep going up in frequency. So this is still 22 hertz, and then we changed to something like 25, 26 hertz, and we lose that resonance. Now let's go to 33 hertz, which will be the third mode of vibration. Here we are. Again, I've stopped the video so that you can see what's going on here. It's basically the same thing again. We have a frequency coming into the system, still at the same amplitude, but now the string naturally wants to resonate at this frequency, but in order to do that, a smaller section of the string has to be vibrating. So it naturally stops vibrating in those 2 sections you can see there in the middle, and we have these 3 areas where the string is vibrating up and down more than the amplitude that we're putting in from the woofer. Let's start the video again and go higher in frequency. This is 33 hertz. Let's go up to 37, 38 hertz, and up.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this right here for a second to emphasize something. All right, so right now you can see that that string is pretty straight. The reason why is because of resistance. Okay, so this is when I talk to you about harmonic structure, sound is a harmonic structure. So when you have these waveforms, you have a sound. But this is noise. Okay, so this is a frequency that is creating noise and resistance and bracing in the string. So, bad thing. All right, what does that do? Well, that causes destruction. Okay, so when you're feeling sick building syndrome, okay, remember I told you that I always tell you the story about Kroger's, that Kroger's up there at Kenwood. As soon as I walked into there, I got nauseous because of the lighting, because of the vibrations of the highway. That was a sick building. It was doing this instead of harmonically resonating the resistance. So anything within that field ended up getting negative vibration and feeling bad. And we talked about this when Teresa, when I went to her building and did that health fair there, and I'm standing on the floor and I can feel the air conditioning just making me nauseous. And I said, well, no wonder why nobody wants to work at Teresa's place. Okay, they all want to be at the field, and everybody in the office was always agitated. It was a sick building. Okay, so that kind of process, these are things that are affecting your cellular functionality. And I'll show you why when we get into another video here. So this, so the first wave would be what we would call in music the fundamental tone, and that's the whole string doing it. And this was created by Pythagoras. Okay, so this is how Pythagoras discovered how music was. And so it goes way back, 500 BC. And the second one was the octave. So when you were at that 11 hertz would have been the fundamental for that. Now that has no note. 11 hertz doesn't have a note. And 22 hertz would have been the octave of that. And then this next one where you had the 3 would have been the third, what they call the third. You had 3 waves. Okay, and that would, the fifth. And then the next one again will be a doubling of the octave, I believe. We'll see.
44 hertz. Right there.
Okay, so we've taken the 1, we brought it to 2, and now we're at 4.
So at 44 hertz, we have the same behavior again. Now we have 3 points on the string where it's not vibrating, and 4 points where it's vibrating more than the amount of energy that we're putting in, or the excursion that we're putting in using the woofer.
Okay, so this is normal harmonic structure. Now let's get rid of this. But that is not the way your body is. Okay? This is more representative of how things happen in your body. And this is going to be water. So we're going to be filming water that's on a vibrating table. And they put a little oil in there so that the oil will separate and you'll be able to see the harmonics. Now, since all of our cells are water, basically they are a liquid medium. Remember, little protein molecules and everything has to work within liquid. So this is the kind of things that they have to work against. So that first thing there is noise. All right, it's creating this chaotic situation. And then suddenly it'll get into a resonance had a little too much oil there. So this is noise. And now this is where it comes into a harmonic. Now, you can choose to go with the flow of these harmonics, or you could choose to be in resistance of that. So if you looked at it from the intracellular point of view, the functions that some of these like motor proteins and stuff have to do, it's going to put them in resistance to this harmonic. They may have to cross some of those lines and go into the less stable areas. All right, so, you know, that's the way it is with the earth as well. It's not always perfect. The winds interrupt our flow, you know, the medium of our air, etc. But you can see there's a point where everything is messed up. Okay, and that's that noisy transition. So the water within our cells, the water within our interstitial spaces, is greatly affected by the environmental vibrations and harmonics around us. I believe if I'm right here, they're going to go and just show you negativity. He does a chant, but now what he's going to do is play discordant sounds. You know, music that's bad, where you're playing chords that are out of things, and you can see it breaks down. So this kind of vibration is what can cause apoptosis in your cells. All right, and this is what we're talking about when we get into industrial vibration problems, is that it's literally knocking the water out of the bowl. And when you knock the water out of the bowl, you basically killed the cell. Okay, let's get that back. Ah, I lost you all. Oh, if I do that. There you all are. It's magic.
Hold on. Is that cultural at all? Because that bad music sounded a whole lot like Chinese music. I don't think is discordant at all.
The Chinese opera?
Yeah.
Well, we weren't hearing the bad music. They weren't.
Okay.
They weren't actually doing it. You had just some background soundtrack. Okay.
Okay.
And they were doing that to not cause you pain and discomfort.
Okay.
Okay. So now, and remember, as I said, the body can have adhesions in different parts. So all the different cells of your body are being affected differently. All right, so this is that point of why I have to say you have to break down those adhesion structures within your body so you can create the resonance. And the only way you can do this is through creating the resonance within yourself. Through movement, through chant, okay? Or like using the holosound device where it vibrates your bones. And that then we can create, whenever we're getting to the point of vibrating your bones, you are opening up stuff. Now, all that is kind of artificial. Okay? So that's why we talk about holding the heart. Okay? We can be in resistance. We can introduce doing things, or we can do the not doing. Okay? And the not doing way is to get rid of the resistance to your own heartbeat by going into the deep enough relaxation that you're allowing your heartbeat to go in there and set the rhythm. Now, remember, it is the beating of your heart, okay, and not, let me step back here, okay, your egg cell, your zygote, once it's fertilized, once the egg cell is fertilized, it takes on a vibration, a beat. And it's that beat that forms your connective tissue network, okay? It creates the division of your stem cells. So that's your natural resonance. That's your harmonic chord, okay? That's your string length, okay? And that beat drives all the productivity of your stem cells, and then once it's just free floating, okay? So it's kind of like that bowl, all right? So when that bowl has all that water in there and it's all beating and it's doing all its harmonic thing, so your egg gets going, and at about 16 cell divisions, it attaches to your mom's womb, okay? Now we have a point of resistance. And in embryology here, that allows us to create structure. It's this resistance that allows us to create structure, that resistance. So now that beating is working against a reference point. And that's where the Cartesian grid of your stem cells takes place, your connective tissue. What we would call in Chinese the main acupuncture meridians, okay? The upper and lower meridians start to build. So you start, that resistance creates connective tissue. And connective tissue creates the structure that all your cells will attach to. And that connective tissue becomes a generator of energy, which will hold the key on how you evolve and how you create structure. So you need that point of resistance. Okay, so when Ilya Perigoni was talking about, as a biologist, was talking about the entropy of the universe and the Big Bang, and like I told you, he got a Nobel Prize for basically spoofing the Big Bang, but everybody was too stupid to realize that he was saying that the Big Bang couldn't happen because it's physically impossible, because you didn't have containment. Okay, if you have a Big Bang, the energy just goes. It's only in resistance that it can create the universe. So the Big Bang had to be encapsulated by another structure that was larger than that, or multiple things. So in order for the Big Bang, or basically a nuclear bomb, in order for an atomic bomb to go off, it can't just go out. It has to have contrary forces coming in to create an implosion that creates a massive explosion. Okay, simple physics. All right, so that's why the shaping of the charges, all these charges fire simultaneously at the radioactive material, which then creates a chain reaction. If you don't have the resistance, you can't create structure. Ooh, containment. So only being a biologist was he able to say the cosmology of the Big Bang was bullshit. Because it violated everything we know to be true about energy. And physics, that is. Okay, so it's fun. Took me 20 years after that lecture to figure that out, but you know, most people never get that. And they're the scientists that still endorse the Big Bang Theory, but no.
Like chopping wood that we hear about.
Right. So when that body starts to form and that structure and that energy starts to form, we're always going to have some sort of resistance against it. So the heart, that pulsing of the pulsing of the embryo, okay, at first, then becoming the zygote, then there's one stem cell that subdivides. It's the beating. It's the primary beater, okay? And that, because all the stem cells are working together, but then this one becomes the primary beater. And it subdivides. One half of that becomes the brain. The other half of that becomes the heart. Okay, so we have this natural resonance between the two entities. Okay, and that beat then creates the body. Okay, you create the neural tube between those things. You create this. So your heartbeat becomes the primary cure for all your ailments. Ooh. And since it sits right on your spine, okay, and that's why if you lay down on your back, it goes through your spine, so it goes through your nervous system. And as I've told you before in Movements of Peace, the heart is the only thing that comes in direct contact with every cell of your body. The nerves do not. Okay, because every cell has to attach to a capillary bed in order to get oxygen, and that is driven by the heart. So the voice of the heart is heard by every single cell. It is touched by every single cell. If it does not hear that, it can go haywire or it will die, because obviously it's not going to be able to get oxygen. So every cell of your body is in some direct contact with the heart. That's why we talk about the power of the heart and the power of the heart to heal. And as I tell you in my myth of the immortal's breath, okay, the heart brain, not only is it connected, runs your body because it's in touch with every single cell, but that secondary part of the brain can go beyond the body and connect to the supernatural stream. All right, to the cord that connects us all together of all creation. So we can be healed through angelic interaction, or I should say godly interaction, divine interaction, through that connection. So if you cut your heart off from your body, now, mind you, you're not really doing that, okay, because your heart's going to get through whether you interfere with it or not. But the more you interfere with it, the less effective it's going to be. If you are muting the language of the heart to each one of your cells or to sections of your cells, okay, and the most common place we do that is our legs, all right, if you are building up so much adhesions that the heart doesn't get through, well, what happens? Well, those adhesions then create atherosclerosis. Okay, the pressures of those against the arteries creates the tearing of the arteries, okay, that then gets them clogged up with cholesterol. Cholesterol does not clog your arteries unless there's a wound. And the wounds are created with resistance against adhesion and braced material. Okay? As the arteries are moving back and forth, they're impeded. Okay, so let's take the same model that we're talking about that causes fibromyalgia, that causes neuropathy, is nerves not being able to pass through the interstitial spaces. They get glued together. Well, this happens to arteries too. But arteries pulse. Nerves just kind of stay there and they're okay into that. But as the artery has to pulse in order to get that down, if that's impeded, okay, it's going to tear. So if I have a point of pressure on this and I move this back and forth, I'm going to abrade that point. And that is where wounds will be created in the interlumen, and that is where cholesterol will have to go in to plug up those holes. And it eventually plugs up the artery. So the basis of a heart attack in your chest is now, finally, I was onto this in 1985, But now scientists are finally onto it now, and it's like, hey, heart disease is caused by adhesions within the heart muscle. Well, duh. All you had to do was look at a diseased heart. I will tell you, the first time when they cracked open, when I was there at a bypass surgery back in 1981, 71, no, 1979 actually. And these are early bypass. When they open up a heart and you see a sick heart loaded with adhesions. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know all that glue that I was looking at was adhesions and that those arteries were so glued up. And, you know, you watch bypass surgery, it was like, you got this kind of gray looking heart. Now, when we had to do dissections of hearts in our clinic, they were beautiful, okay, because they were farm-raised pigs. Okay, we got them from wherever, Cons or whatever, okay, UC. So they gave us all these hearts so that we could do dissections on, because a pig's heart is a perfect replica of a human heart. And you can see all this tissue, and you can see these arteries, and you can, as you're dissecting it, it's like I tell you, the meat just separates really nicely because they're raised and, you know, to be slaughtered. So they don't want them to get a bunch of adhesions and ruin the meat. Duh. Okay, but then you see that human heart, the sick human hearts, dramatically different. Now, the problem is that when doctors usually see hearts, they're sick. So that becomes, the sick heart becomes the normal heart. They're not, okay? So we have done that in most of our medical stuff, is we've taken pathological organs and we say, oh, that's a normal organ, rather than saying, well, is that the best it can be? So moving on, here's this beautiful heart muscle that you have that is the core of your harmonic system. The key is to get the resistance out of you so that you can feel that beat of your heart in every part of you. And that will melt the adhesions. Okay? That will break it all down. And if you got nothing to do, you can spend hours doing this. All right? And you can feel that transmission moving from your hands. Okay? I remember the first time I really discovered that. I had gone out jogging. It was like 10 below zero because I lived in Wisconsin. And I was leaning against this little 2-inch tree and was looking up at the sunrise that was coming up, and I noticed how the tree limbs were moving. And I said, that's weird. And then I realized that's moving. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, and I said, it's moving in time with my heart. And then I realized, could it be? And it was. My heart was making those limbs move. So then the next thing I did is I went into work that day, and I was a designer, and I had this beautiful drafting table, okay? And I put my hands on the drafting table, and I can make the drafting table vibrate. Okay, it's like, whoa, cool. What other things can I vibrate through? All right. Well, if you lay in your cot or a bed, you can, with a hard mattress, you can make that vibrate. Okay, so those are all the things you can do that. So that's when I realized, so that would have been 1985. That's when I realized the power of the heart physically. Okay, we underestimate that. But I had a heart that was doing a lot of running at that time, and you run for 40 minutes at, 160 beats per minute, you develop a big heart. Okay? That's a big muscle at that particular point. Okay, and there's very little difference I will tell you, stress-wise, between that big heart requires a lot of blood circulation. And that big heart gives a lot of resistance to that, so it can increase your blood pressure. People keep thinking that all these people that are doing it, all this running, it's good for them. It's not. It's easier to die than a regular size heart. Okay, because it has more energy demands. But you start sitting over that drawing board all your life and you're squeezing that heart in your chest. And you're creating adhesion. So this is why I keep telling you guys about breaking down the adhesions in your chest and not to lean. And that you have to use the vocalizations and the beating of your heart to break it down. So holding the heart not only has this metaphysical ability of communicating with the supernatural stream, with other hearts around it, with other brains around it, but it's also your core of your healing. Okay, so when we talk about movements of peace being a heart-based issue, we're talking about this on those three levels. On the supernatural level, on the metaphysical level of its ability to influence other brains and other hearts. Okay, now that was a pretty cool study that people who were doing healing, their heartbeats were reflected in the brain waves of the people that were being healed. Okay, so that's a pretty metaphysical thing, and that can be done across distances. So once again, humans, with their preoccupation of glorifying their brains, believe that remote healing comes from their states of consciousness. It does, but not from your mind. It comes from your heart. The state of consciousness of your heart. The state of resonance of your heart. So the better healer is the person with the less burdened heart. And that's physically burdened, obviously, but emotionally unburdened as well. Okay, so that's my big philosophical lecture about resonance today.
Yeah, so Mike, you've done so much remote healing. Does that resonate for you in terms of what he's saying? And can you elaborate any?
Oh, I've actually been thinking on some of those things. I don't know if you were there the one morning, but Vince had me hold the dowsing rods, the homemade ones, and move them. And I didn't even think about it. I just followed his order. And they moved. Then he took them and stood about 7 or 8 feet away and told me to move them again. And one I could move and the other not so much. And so trying to replicate that consciously, I still haven't figured out, but this really kind of gave me a different way to focus on that. Because before I was just trying to create a different picture of it, offset 3 inches or whatever in my mind to try to do it. Interestingly enough, in Fred Payne's training, we would had 2 techniques. When you came to class, you were supposed to bring a Polaroid picture of a person in dire need, pain and misery, and you would work on that picture with intent. And again, I don't know the mechanics of it, but you could see the picture change. The second way to do it was to have a person become what he called a radionic witness for that person. So if Vince wanted to work on you and you weren't there, and I could take on a channel, or I don't know what to call it, but it works. I mean, I've seen it repeated multiple times. And interestingly enough, in the Millers, the pranic healing group stuff, we had 2 ladies from Hamilton over there at the church, an observatory, the old Catholic church, I guess, in the basement. and they were all bunged up and couldn't move or anything. And I'm standing there waving, doing general clearing on them, and they're making fun of me and stuff. And so I just went ahead and did it. You can't embarrass me. And you could see the change in their demeanor. So 5 minutes later, they were laughing. And when I pointed that out to them, they didn't realize that they had changed during that thing. And there's some stagecraft in all this. Like with them, when you do an inner aura cleaning, and you have a spray bottle of vodka and water and one other natural chemical, and you do this, and you spray your hands, and you throw it into a bucket of salt water, and it's just pretty amazing to see it. I worked on Brian once with Fred Payne stuff, and I swear he took me to the guard, which is down that slope, and I didn't even have hands on him. I was in the room with him, but when we walked down there to observatory or whatever it is, I don't think his feet ever touched the ground. I mean, he was just lit up like a hot air balloon and yammering and stuff. And I had the thought, I need to get the hell out of here. So the one book, Train Your Mind, Change Your Brain, they talk about the wavelengths, which Vince is pointing out, that Ingo Swann was one of the better remote healers, and he's mentioned in there that they could measure his wavelengths coming out, and in order to stop the wavelengths, and I've never seen him work, so I don't know if he was just sitting still or whatever, Vince may know, but they had to put him in a Faraday cage and turn the electric on before they could stop those wavelengths from going out of the building. And the other thing with all that remote healing, it doesn't appear to be time dependent.
Right. It's not.
Like if I'm supposed to work on you at 2 o'clock today, Rick, and something came up and I do it now before I left to go somewhere else, you'll get that energy when you need it. So, in Fred's clearing process, they always say time, no time, space, no space, and from whatever realm or locality it needs to be.
Right. Since time doesn't exist, it's all in the present. So that's a thing I always use is when people say, pray for me when I'm in my surgery, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to pray right in that moment because I will forget otherwise.
Right.
Okay, it's not time dependent. You send the energy at the moment, and that also works backwards in time. All right, so as odd as that may seem, that changing the past thing is a lot harder for human brains to grasp. It's easier to say, oh, going to have surgery next week. I will pray for you now, and it'll be there when you get there. It's kind of like, oh, we'll both arrive together. That's easy to conceive rather than praying to change something in the past. Okay.
That's interesting. As part of a dowsing system, you're checking for yes and no's and probabilities. And if you're checking for something, you could go back in time,
right,
and check at that date what was the blood pressure, what was what. Now, it's hard to douse into the future. You can't really rely on that, although you could get some good hits sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not clairvoyancy.
Right.
So, very interesting. Excellent work today. I mean, really, between yesterday and today, you really tuned me up.
Well, see, all you have to do is show up and magic happens. The hardest thing.
It's interesting on the remote healing. I limit that because I can't heal myself the way I should be able to. So if somebody's in great need, I'll help them or whatever, but I don't practice it as a normal consciously. I don't practice it normally.
Right.
But all my out-of-body experience, I have no cognizance or knowledge of. And the last time I was at the Monroe Institute, Joe lives across the street, and I consciously worked on his back. And then I got the thought, I've been doing it for a long time without having any knowledge of it. So it's like being in the room with a positive person. Those wavelengths and energy come off, and it'll change your attitude. What's your problem?
Well, I'm gonna share something because you brought that up because of the Monroe Institute. It was a particular thing that happened. Somebody needed remote healing, and I decided to give him to it, and it was an astral kind of a thing. And what I saw was that somebody else was working on that person. Okay, but they weren't a good healer. All right, they were just doing massage kind of thing. So I went through that person's body and did the healing work.
Interesting.
Okay, but that was a real-time experience. Okay, because ultimately I was able to talk to the parties. Okay, that's the cool thing about the Monroe Institute. You got so many people there that, well, in the past, that were explorers and stuff like that. But so sometimes, like, when a person calls in help, like a healer, they may be getting somebody that is incarnate. Okay, we always think about that as being spiritual guides, because technically, we're not really incarnate. We're only incarnate in our own minds. Okay, technically, we're all spiritual things. We're all energy forces. But sometimes you can call into a person in real living time. Okay, and so that's something you may have been doing as well, is you may have been actually working through other people.
Yeah, big yeses there. So it's interesting, in Begley's book, she talks about the remote healers, and like 2/3 of them get the energy flowing and just say, let this body be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And when Kurt and I did that, it sounded like a BB gun or a
Right.
22 going off in your room.
Mm-hmm.
And we both heard it and felt it.
Yeah, felt, yeah.
It was crazy. Your Western science doesn't allow for any of those type of seeings or emotions or feelings.
Yeah. Well, I certainly understand that. And sometimes when you're doing healing, you get yourself. That spirit that comes in is your own self from another particular time frame, or at least at another level of being. So it's a fascinating process when you allow yourself to be open.
So, Rick, did I answer your question? Or you tell I believe in the shotgun approach.
Yeah, not the way I was anticipating, but it was good to hear.
Let me know if you want to have a session and we could talk about specifics.
Okay.
Attaboy,
Hey,
Mike.
with feeling the vibration of the heart, if we relax, I was just wondering, would it be better, it's particularly at the beginning, starting out, to lay on a solid surface?
Yes.
To have that resistance to feel more? Okay.
Yeah. Sure, absolutely. Okay. Laying on the floor. Remember how many times that I had you guys go and do, like when we used to do Bagua, and I'd say, okay, everybody lay down. And then you just immediately feel the heartbeat would be just pulsing through you. And most people would have little out-of-body experiences. Yeah. Okay? Because, as I said, the heart's connected to it. Is once the mind's in an altered state and it drops into that heart-mind, you're not doing much thinking, you're just in that zone. Okay, then that heart-mind can really take over. And if you drop the body out of it and just let it be supportive, it can do wondrous things. Okay.
So, Kurt, I'm sorry. Kurt,
Yep.
when you're trying to start a nail and you hit your thumb or your finger,
Yep.
and it throbs.
Right.
So if you're laying on your back in the basic meditations where we circulate through the dantian backwards and up and over, send that energy to that spot that hurts. And if you do it quietly in repetition without great expectations, pretty soon that area will take on the heartbeat. You can feel it throbbing.
Right. Yeah, I've had that. Yeah. My thought was just more as a training thing. I mean, it's still going to be doing it even if we're laying in a soft bed. It's just there's no feedback that we're so out of touch that we don't feel it.
Well, there's a power of bouncing. Okay, one of the reasons why, aside from the obvious things, one of the reasons why I liked people laying on the floor when we did meditations is because you just had this little pad, okay, but you felt that floor, so it gave you that real distinguishing aspect between real and not real. But it gives your energy a chance to, especially when we're talking about like focus 10 and stuff, to bounce off of something. Okay, because you're still in time space. Okay, so because you're in this altered state and you're still in time space, you can use that to bounce. Whereas if you're on a bed or a soft surface, you don't have that resistance. Now, that's good for traveling. Okay, like being in a float tank or doing the Monroe Institute stuff where you don't want any sensory things to bring you to reality. That's kind of, that's the better thing. Or it's like, the Monroe, their little thing is basically a water bed that's an immersion tank as well. So you're just kind of in this thing, and then they have it all grounded, so there's no electromagnetic fields coming into you. So you have no distractions whatsoever. Okay, no sensory things that can be affecting you. All right, but that's great for traveling. It's not so good if you want to be able to interact with the world. So part of the reasons why I kept everybody on the ground was I wanted you to have that duality. Okay, anybody can successfully meditate in a float tank. Okay, but can you do that when your hip's hurting you? Because the floor is pushing against you. Okay, now you really have to turn it on. You really have to use your power to relax, to alter reality. So there is a point to be said about resistance, okay? Yeah. Other than just training.
Oh, okay.
Okay,